Hello and good day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for tuning in. This is your captain speaking, and welcome to We Educate Racing. In this video, we're going to talk about how to tune for anti-roll bars in Gran Turismo 7. Before we get into that, though, I just want to make sure you guys have seen the natural frequency, the dampers, and the ride height videos. Not so that you guys would be caught up to how we get these values here, but also so that you guys would understand what we're talking about in this video. And without further ado, lights out and away we go. The anti-roll bar, as it states in the name, restricts how much roll the car generates when cornering. Now there are other videos on YouTube that further explain and define what this is and how it works and all of that. So I'll leave you to it to do your research and then you can just come back here. Reason so that for this video I just want to keep it relevant to the game. Okay, so therefore I want to show you guys a quick demonstration. Ignore the 100th value. We're only focusing on the 10, number 10, and ignore the ride height because we're going to pretend that this is our springs at a standstill. They're equal, right? The 10, not the 110, just the 10. Okay. Now we're going to pretend that we don't have an anti-roll bar installed, and our demonstration corner will be Bathurst turn 1, which will be a left-hander. All right. At around the apex, the right spring will compress, while the inside spring will extend. Okay. This is what our springs looks like when it's cornering to the left. Okay. Now we hit pause and we install anti-roll bar at its lowest setting. When we do this, our car body roll now looks like this. And that the more we increase this value, the flatter our car becomes. Mind you, we're still cornering near apex. Right? You see what I'm doing here? The higher my anti-roll bar gets, the flatter the car becomes. Now, obviously, this is a good thing. You want to keep the car flat when cornering. Except the problem is, it's inevitable that the car will roll. So even if the ride height, or the, it messed me up. Even though the springs are leveled and the car is rolling, that means the wheel is off the ground. And we don't want that, right? So just things to keep in mind, not to go extremes unless you intend to go extremes. But because we're racing, we want to keep the car, the wheel on the ground, right? Now, onto the little tips and tricks, starting with the front because it's the first thing you feel when entering a corner. Obviously, you don't enter the corner with the rear unless you're drifting, but that's a whole nother thing. So, tips and tricks for the front, right? The front and rear play different roles. So you cannot tune these the same and expect the same results. So don't do that. Okay, that's bullet point 1. Oh yeah, you can take notes on this if you want, or take your phone out, type it down, or just save this video until you memorize this. But yeah, you need to know these little tips just so before you tune for anti-roll bar. Okay, all right. Number 2, the front generates understeer. The more you increase this, which then would mean the rear generates oversteer. Okay, but yeah, so the front. Again, if it's too stiff, then your wheel's going to come off the ground. If it's too soft, then the spring will extend as the body rolls. Therefore, there's no weight on the inside wheel, which means there's no traction either. So therefore, you might as well leave the ground because it's doing the same thing. So you want to find a happy medium that would make it so that the weight of the wheel is keeping the nose down, but at the same time, the anti-roll bar is not strong enough to pull the wheel off the ground. Okay, so next bullet point would be the window between for road cars is between 3 and 5. So for this car, because it's a road car, I'm just going to set mine to 4. On a race car, we would start at 5. Okay, but road car. Okay, and then for the front, the roll bar works laterally, left and right. When the right spring compresses, it will also compress the left. Okay, for the fronts. Important to know, and we'll get to that later. And then It's the front's job, obviously, to just keep the wheel down, and that's it. There's no other purpose for the anti-roll bar. I mean, apart from the roll, it's going to roll regardless, yes, but the main thing is to ensure that the wheel stays on the ground as much as possible, which also means keeping the nose leveled, right? Because the springs are not, yeah, you get it. Okay, so yeah, I'm sure there are more other tips in terms of tuning for the front, but that's basically the more important ones to keep in mind. If you intend on going over curbs and you don't want the car to hop too much in terms of like rolling, then you can soften this. Um, Otherwise, the car will hop, and if you're okay with that, then cool. Um, and then at the same time, when the car turns in, you do want the right wheel or the outside wheel to compress into the car. You do want that. Um, which in turn will compress the inside wheel as well, but it keeps it flat. If it's too stiff, that means the tire is not going into the wheel well. Therefore, it's generating understeer. Like the car doesn't want to roll into the turn. Okay, so yeah, don't go too extreme. Just keep that in mind. 4 is always good for road cars. 5 to 6 is good for race cars. All right. Now, just one more thing before we move to the rear. The reason why road cars are lower than race cars is because of the weight, right? And not only that, but the ride height. Road cars are usually as low as 3 inches, and race cars could go as low as 1 inch, right? And race cars are even lighter than this. So the inertia generated when cornering is much lower. Therefore, you can increase your anti-roll bar stiffer. In a road car, it's more likely to roll. And so if your anti-roll bar is too stiff, then it's going to pull the wheel off the ground. And again, we don't want the wheel, inside wheel off the ground. Reason is because the rear is rotating around the inside wheel. And if the wheel is off the ground, then the car would be rotating on the outside, and that's just bad news. That's a lot of oversteering and understeering. It's just not good. Okay, so okay. If you need to go back, rewind it to if in case you missed anything for the front, then go and do so. And that being said, we can go to the back. Okay. As mentioned earlier, the front and rear play different roles. Reason is because the front is focused on corner entry, while the rear focuses on corner exit. Okay, and one thing to remember is that we want our car to be stable on corner exit. So we want this technically lower than the front anti-roll bar because we don't want it too stiff, which would make the rear agile, which would mean it can generate more oversteer. Not good. So we'll keep if I was to tune my rear anti-roll bar, it's almost always lower than the front. Okay, so that being said, my road car window would be between 2 and 4, so we'll start at 3. And then for race cars, it's between 3 and 5, so you would start at 4. But for our road car here, we'll start at 3. And almost always, I'm most likely to reduce this down to 2 because I only want my oversteer to be generated with the ride height. Okay, so we've set our ride height already, and then we're going to go and test to see how much oversteer this is generating. When it's generating too much oversteer on our testing, it's because of this value. Okay, so we'll keep that in mind. Once we've set this to the value we like, then we can adjust for more oversteer with the ride height. Okay, but for now, we'll start this at 3. Okay, and then one more thing to keep in mind, and what I'm about to tell you is like a big secret, and you would only know this if you are an engineer in the anti-roll bar department, but if not, then you heard it from me. Okay, and okay, so basically, not only is the anti-roll bar for the rear working like the front in terms of lateral leveling of the springs, like when the rear compresses, then it's going to compress the inside wheel as well. But because of the how the anti-roll bar is attached to the chassis, it's also leveling the chassis, which means as the rear compresses, it's also keeping the inside front on the ground. It's helping the front anti-roll bar keep the wheel on the ground. So the higher you set this, the more flatter the car becomes. But because increasing this value will generate oversteer, it's going to slide out from under you. The tail will swing out from under you. Um, yeah, there's a big reason why that's happening, but it's too much to explain. But just know that's what's happening. And again, we want our oversteer generated with the rear ride height, not the anti-roll bar. So technically, we're only using the anti-roll bar for the rear to keep the chassis down, the nose down, even though it's going to go up a little bit, but that's what the front is doing. So we're only using a little bit. But also, we don't want to overload the tire, right? When this is flat, that only means as the body rolls, the wheel is also being lifted off the ground, and we don't want that. And it's more imperative that we keep this wheel on the ground because we're going to be accelerating, and we need as much traction as we can. During acceleration, a lot of the times the grip could only hold so much thanks to our rear camber, which we'll get to in the next video. So if you have not subscribed yet, make sure you guys do so you guys don't miss out when that video comes out. But also, it will come to your acceleration sensitivity from your differential. But we'll get to that in the differential video. So again, subscribe so you don't miss out. But we can control any excess wheels sliding with the camber and the differentials, so we can make the anti-roll bar set to low. And then, for example, let's say that we have our ride height to this, and we're okay with this. We're okay with this because as we accelerate, the rear will dip, and when it dips, it comes back to this stance, which is what we want. That's why I was saying we're almost always most likely to increase this value, because we don't want the nose to be doing like a wheelie while we're at speeds, because if that happens, most likely air is going to get caught underneath, making a car do a backflip if the rear is lower than the front at speeds. So that's why most likely this will be higher. But we'll just keep that in mind. But for now, we'll set this value to its 3 so that when we go out and test this car, you'll know exactly why the car is behaving. Therefore, we can adjust this so you guys will feel exactly what I'm feeling in the same car. Okay. Now, before I close, one special tip from me, and if you ask me, this is just personal tip and trick from me, is that you tune your car to understeer off the bat. Like out of the factory, you want it to be an understeer setup. That way, when you're tuning, you're only tuning in the direction of oversteer, as opposed to you just take the car out and then you have to figure out what's oversteering and what's understeering, and then you got to adjust this and adjust that. It's too complicated. What we're doing is simplifying tuning after we've set our base setup. And your base setup is almost always going to look like this every time you start. In the beginning, you're going to set your natural frequency to the middle in the beginning. But as you drive around and tune and test, you realize that this is too stiff, and then you almost always come back down on this side, on the softer end. Remember, the softer you go, the more grip you're generating at the expense of burning your tires faster. Okay, so there is a compromise for that. The stiffer you get, then your tires will last longer, but you get agility, but you lose traction easier, which in turn you lose traction or you lose grip anyway. So there's a compromise that you need to meet. And as a driver, you'll feel this. When you drive around, you feel that the strength of the spring is strong enough to support the weight of the car as you drive it. All right? And so, yeah. That's pretty much it for anti-roll bars. I hope you guys learned anything, or at least enjoyed the video. If so, give me a thumbs up, and I'd sincerely appreciate it. And then, again, we're going to be talking about camber in the next video. So, yeah, until then, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.